Hello and welcome on the Esoteric Software stream. My name is Erika, and in this festive edition of today's stream, we will be seeing how to add and manage alternative poses inside your skeleton in spine. We already saw something similar in previous blog posts as well as during previous Twitch streams, so I recommend you also have a look at those. If you're looking at a recording of this, I'll be placing links in the description of the video, so check it please. This will be our model version of Spine Boy that is very festive. And we have this very normal standard pose for him, but he also has some alternative hands. Let's activate those hands. As you see, and this is interesting, the various parts have different positioning. Common approach to this, which is not entirely wrong but can get very confusing very fast, is when people start adding multiple limbs, transforming poor Spine Boy into an octopus. So you create a new set of bones for a new pose, you end up with a lot of useless bones. So I'm going to show you an alternative approach that is going to keep your files tidier and easier to manage, and will also expand the possibilities of recombining the various pieces during today's stream. For this hand, I actually have three versions. So as you see, they can vary a lot in the position, and I'm sure that this is exactly the setup that some of you will encounter. I think I'll attempt to add this bone and show you how to create bones so that they are aligned with the new pose, but so that they will stay in the correct place in setup pose and hold everything together. I'm gonna first start by rigging the standard pose of this. Okay, so the first thing that we want to do when we open our project and we have all our images that we imported with the Photoshop to Spine script, check the video about the Photoshop to Spine script in case you're watching this recording. Now we select the Create tool here, and I'm going to create the hips. So I like to hold Control so that the image gets outlined and it's easier for me to pick the middle. So I'll click here, okay, and that creates the hips. And what's nice, it creates a bone that it's already called hips with the hips image parented to it. So remember this trick. That kind of worked, but not really, so I'm gonna use compensate to rotate the bone until it reaches perfection. So let's make it face down, let's make it a tad longer. Okay, you can select the last bone in something that you want to create eye-case for, and then you can make sure to be in parent axis. So let's click that, okay, and then hit new bone, and that will create a bone exactly on the tip, which is great to avoid that your bones move when you want to create a case. Then I reparent the bone, I press P because it's faster, to the root, and then from here I select the two bones that I want to be in the IK, new IK constraint. I select this one, I choose front. Okay, I can see it. This time is the good one. Yes! As stated, we are gonna create the bone structure for the hands. Once we are satisfied, we create the meshes. Once we are satisfied with the main pose, we start adding the alternative poses for the hands. I hold Control, and then I decide that this is gonna be the pivot. I select this bone, then I select this image, then I select the other. Maybe I select this too, better. Okay, I'm gonna end it here. I click and drag. Oh, we can already create we could call it alt pose animation. So in here, we could try to activate the alternative images, and what you see is that when we have these alternative images, they don't match our skeleton at all. We have our bone structure that is here, but our images are in a completely different position. Let's create some basic meshes. So let's start from the hand because it's very easy. We create a mesh, and now in this case we don't need anything really fancy. What I was really interested in making was this structure here that I'm gonna make now to make the bending of this part a bit easier. So I'm just gonna bind it to these two bones, and I'll make sure that this is completely on the hand. Let's rotate it. Okay. Ooh, it's terrible. I always try to go with the simplest solution first, and then if that's not good enough, I add more vertices. So I'm adding a middle one and two on the side, and then check the result. Alright, then I rotate it in the opposite direction. I'm not even gonna use all these angles, it's just the, you know, a habit to have to test it in both directions. That's good. Okay. So this is another part that can be a bit hard to do, especially for beginners, but it's actually not that hard. So the key is to have one part stick always to the rest of the structure here, and since this structure is actually gonna be soft, we may even have it at an in-between pose. So we'll start from these, trying to attach it to the upper part. And if it looks bad, then we'll have the upper part also bend a little bit. So mesh, edit mesh, new mesh, and let's make a brand new structure. Okay, so this part is the part that it's gonna basically stay the same, so we just need 4 vertices around it. Then here, instead, we want to go a bit closer. So as you notice, I'm placing vertices where the line art ends, because I want to be able to control that part better. Then I bind these two here and here, okay? Because it looks more like this soft material that it is. Then this upper part, I know that I want it to be more influenced here. What can come to our help is to add more internal vertices to suggest a more 3D kind of structure here. I'm basically adding just 2 vertices here. Why 2 vertices? Because that's generally enough to suggest where that something is a bit curved. Still a little bit of a mess, but now we are gonna change these weights here. It is kind of better. It is at least believable now, and if we bend it in the opposite direction, it's a little bit better, but I don't like, okay, here how it is bending. I think that it's great to see a moving animation of this so that I can really understand the distortion that is going on. So the reason I'm dedicating all this time now here, it's because I want to get the weights right so that when I add alternative poses for it, they are gonna make sense and have the same logic underneath. So if I have to do it for the alternative pose, I better also do it for the regular pose. So I'm gonna go with this and focus on getting also the upper arm here done. So mesh, edit mesh. Here, why am I creating these 2 vertices? Because this way I can have this part more attached to the body if I want. Then, to get the best looking results in terms of fake 3D, we'd want to have, again, that double structure on the inside here. I'll try with this first. I don't think I'm gonna get great results, but I want to test it out first, so I'm binding it to the body and to the arm and to the lower arm. So the problem with only having external vertices is that this part here feels a bit flat, and that is why I was mentioning that I wanted to add some more vertices, but I wanted to check the result first before committing to additional vertices. Here I'm gonna add those additional vertices and add more. We can even add slight influence, but not too much. Our character that can move this arm and is ready to get an alternative pose. Now let's get the same treatment on this other one. And how do we add those alternative poses to this skeleton? So the first step is gonna be we have to activate all the alternative images. So let's do that. It's fine that they are in their own position. the trick is actually simple. First, we select all these new parts like this, and then we turn them into meshes. Then we have to create the meshes for all of these, and we'll bind them to the root. This will give us the possibility to freely move the bones that are parented to them without affecting the images, because the images will follow the root despite the fact that they are parented to these bones. The first thing we want to do is to create a mesh structure for each of these. If you can get the mesh structure right the first time, then it's gonna be great. Otherwise, I'm also gonna show you how to change this structure in case. There, I'm actually looking forward to this part. So here I'm gonna add these two vertices. Now, and here is another reason for why I insisted on doing the meshes for the arms first. That's because this way I already know more or less what kind of structure the same parts, the meshes of the same parts had. So I know more or less what I want to add to get similar results. Okay, then we have all the meshes in place. Now we are ready to actually do that part. So the next step, after we get all the meshes in place, is to bind them to the root or to a bone that doesn't move, which I expect the root to never move. So again, the steps were, first we rig our normal stuff, then we create meshes for all of the alternative pieces in setup mode, and we bind them all to the root. And now we go to our alternative pose animation, where we activate those alternative pieces, and we start matching the bones to these new parts. So what is important here is also that we remember that this animation here, we are going to use it like a sort of alternative setup pose. So I'm gonna literally add alt setup pose here in the name of the animation. That's because you have to consider it as if you were blessed with a second setup pose, that it's always relative to the actual setup pose. So we got this, and we start aligning the pieces. Now, and here is something else that is interesting. Okay, what do we do when some parts, like in this case, are in perspective? How do we match this part? It's clearly not the same length. Now, my best advice about it is to switch to the parent axis here and translate this until the pivot here matches more or less with your alternative image. Now, let me use this reference here. Okay, so this should be fine. Maybe even a little bit lower here. So we get these, it doesn't matter that it's gonna be a little bit longer, that this part is gonna stick out, it's gonna be fine. So from here, we keep aligning these pieces, and the parts that stick out don't matter to us, basically. And again, we translate this so that it stays here. That's because shrinking it this way is gonna give us the best results, especially if we want to fake perspective. Okay, so as you see, I'm matching the bones that I already have to the position of these new images. Let's say that this is here, but then I want to translate it like more here so that they match. Looks like this part here is a bit longer, so I can move it down like this and then adjust the rotation so that it matches my hand. Okay, so I'll go back to the side pose, and I can even just go back also to the other images. Same here. We basically are getting rid of these alternative images and hiding them in that setup animation that we have. I have to reactivate the correct images. So you see, they kind of stretch. They're not quite the same. So now we have these bones that more or less match. I wanted to add, a bone to control here the position of this hand. So I'm gonna add that. So here at the end, I'm gonna create in parent axis a new bone. I'll call it hand holder because it's going to hold the hand. Okay, I'm gonna parent this hand to it. In this case, we have to copy the translation from this bone and paste it on this bone instead. Then do the same here. So we copy the translation and we paste it here. We are set. Okay, I just have to adjust this, I think. Because in setup mode, it's oriented like this, and then it's like this. So I think this is a good pose. From here, okay, we aligned all the new bones. What do? We want to parent these all these images to the bones while we are in animate mode. Now, if you follow the streams when I streamed in the past, you will notice that I always stress that you have to pay attention if you are in setup mode or animate mode when you are binding your meshes. That's because whatever pose these images bound to the bone, that's the pose that it's going to store internally, which can be disastrous if you do this accidentally moving the bones or during animate mode, so it's different than setup pose and it starts messing up with your mesh. Or it can be a big advantage if you do it in the right places. So you bind the images that you want to follow the setup pose in the setup mode, and the images that are alternate in their specific alternate animation setup that we are now creating. So from here we click bind and we choose the bones that this should follow. We do the same for all of these, and that's gonna store, as mentioned, the position of these bones that they have currently. Okay, so we rig all the parts, and then what I advise you to do is do not move this setup that you just created. Press the space bar, copy all these frames that you just made, and then create a new test animation to test this out. Because you don't want to ruin your alternate setup pose, because then reversing becomes impossible. Always have a testing animation and to avoid accidents. Okay, so we have our testing animation here, and we are gonna move some parts around. Oh, they don't follow. Why? Because we have to change the weights. Everything is still following the route. So let's just change the weights. We can change them very quickly and then refine them. We just have to select the main bone that it's supposed to influence them. Oh, I forgot this one. So I go back to my alt setup pose and I bind the additional piece. Now imagine if I had moved these bones instead. That would have been bad. And then change the weights. So this is gonna be this one. Oh, so we have a testing animation. We may even as well already animate the change from one to the other, just because. So here we say we make a thumbs up animation to make use of this setup pose that we created, even though we haven't refined it yet. But I find that refining this during the animation is the best and quickest way to refine this. So I'm just gonna go straight to animation. And basically what we do is press the spacebar whenever we want to reuse this pose that we just created. Press the spacebar, alt setup pose, we copy these frames like that. And then we go here in this animation, I don't know, I move to frame 25, press Ctrl V, and that creates our keyframe. And then I go back to frame 0 and press Ctrl Shift L so that everything that was keyed to make that alternative pose is also keyed here, as you see. Now, usually what we need to do is, because this starts getting wrecked very quickly, and it would be best to have this happen before the last frame. I'm gonna key something randomly just to have the key here. Okay, so we want these various parts to actually start changing in the middle of this animation. So to anticipate these keys, that's what usually works best. So I don't know, at half of it, that usually works nicely. Okay. Okay, we also need to have it a bit faster. Something like this. That usually works. Notice that all the parts match. They are using the same bone and there's a kind of interpolation that makes sense. So this is already great. Also, I know that some of you prefer to have, I don't know, some neat fading for the parts so that they appear or disappear at the right time. You can do that if you keep these slots separate. That's a possibility. But our objective was still to get these parts to also be weighted, and it's here that it becomes convenient to just edit these weights during the in-betweens of this animation. So we change the weights to accommodate exactly the animation we're using it for. Also notice how, because they are in the same slot, I can see the weights for both changing like this, which is super convenient. So as you see, it becomes very natural, and we just have to repeat these also for these other parts so that they feel more attached, and our job will be done. Let's say that we want to change something in our mesh for some reason. Then the steps to take to do that would be to weight everything back, because if we try to go back in setup mode and, for example, try to change one of the meshes that we have here, we see that it's all distorted. So what we need to do is, in setup mode, we get it back to be influenced by the root 100%, and then we can edit, but then we have to make the weights from scratch. So again, the steps if you need to change your mesh are, from this distorted version, you weight all the vertices to the root, then you can edit. So you go, do your thing, create whatever you need to create. Now you see that if I add this, and then I go back in animate mode, but if I try to weight everything on one of the bones, I believe that I'm gonna see problems. Yeah, you see, this is what happens. I weighted everything. So from the root, you see that everything except for that vertex here is now going towards the new position of the sleeve, but not the vertex. Why? Because we haven't weighted this in the alt setup pose. So what do we need to do? We go back to this alt setup pose, and this is why I stress that you need to not touch it and not destroy it and not test stuff in here, because you'll need this in case you need to make any changes. And from here, you just press update bindings, and now if you go back to try and, so we pressed update bindings, okay, very important. You go here, you select your mesh, press update bindings, boom, it will now work because we stored the new position of the bones. Very important. Okay, so now if we go here and we change the weights so that it follows the sleeve, you see that everything follows in perfect harmony and it's ready to use again. But this was a very important step, and that's why you have to keep that alt position, okay? Okay, so I actually didn't need to add that vertex there, so I'm undoing it. It was just for the sake of showing you, so let me save. I wanted to add that little cherry on top where we also control the 3D-ness of this with this bone here, and that's achieved by moving this wherever we want, and then in the weights here we basically apply the weights so that this follows the hand holder, and then we also have this part here that should but actually, to get the best results, we should move the hand holder across this parent line. That's what it is meant for. Because if we start rotating it around, then what's the point of having this bone, right? So we want to have it travel along this here. Okay, so for example, I move it here, and I just have to change the weights so that these 3 vertices here follow the hand like this. And as you can see, that's also the same treatment that we have to give to these parts here. And my suggestion is to select them as a block, and add the weights like this until this part here matches. If I move it closer, it should look better, and it gives us a bit of leeway with how we can move this. If I had separated also this part, I could have gotten more 3D effect even. But that's, yeah, to show you this effect. We have one last thing to do, which is how do we add additional bones here to, for example, to make the thumb go up during the animation. So we could have it like this, or we could even have more interpolation so he can slowly rise that thumb up. We are gonna add that alternative bone. So what's the approach here? Very easily, we need to have this hand weighted 100% to the one of the bones that is gonna be in the alternative position. If we are gonna add the thumb so that it's controlled by this bone here, and it's gonna be like this, then we need to have it 100% on this. We're gonna go back to setup mode and activate that alternate hand. So it's like this. As you see, now you have a visual reference of where this bone needs to be created. Without it, I would have probably placed it like down here, but with this, it's much clearer. So it's actually easy to add it this way. So I select my parent bone, I go in create mode, and I can create my bone for the thumbs up. I think I'm gonna create it here. Then let's switch to animate mode. And where do we need to go? We need to go to our precious alt setup pose. We activate the correct image, so this one, and we bind also this bone here. We are now ready to make use of it. We are gonna change the weight so that this part follows here. Okay. And here, I'm gonna actually match it to this position that we have here, so it's gonna be nicer. Let's have it start from here. So we get a more of an in-between pose. Right here. And voila! We just have to adjust the timing a little bit, but by the time that this is in the blog post, I'll have it refined and really super nice and tidy. If you are new to spine and you are looking for this kind of techniques, perhaps you want to start from something a bit easier, like the blog posts that we already have out that talks strictly about how to create meshes, how to weight meshes, what's the logic to do these things. Also, we have blog posts about how to use update bindings. There's a very easy one where there's a bird wing that you can rig up and down, and that's the introduction to how update bindings works. This is an advanced usage of it. As you see, it's not really that complicated, but you have to have several kind of habits where you've already gotten used to. So that's something that you may want to check for first. We also use these in those Twitch streams, such as the helmet one, where we do complete turnarounds. The logic is the same. We have an alternative animation that stores the alternative pose, and I'm just showing you how you can make use of it and modify it very easily. So thanks again for being here today and for following this stream till the end. I hope you'll make good use of these tips, and see you next time.